Morning, everybody. So, doing some research here about AI and the forecast for AI and when that would be when that would be everyday use, full implementation. And there's some bottlenecks that could delay implementing AI. Let me give you an example. AI requires enormous amount of electrical power. Some estimates are that each each data center, for example, that would power AI. 'Cause AI has to have enormous amount of what they call learning modules. Just imagine racks and racks and racks of computers, aisles and aisles and aisles of racks, all in these data centers. There's no people in these data centers. I mean, there's a few technicians, electricians, and computer engineers, but by and large, these data centers are vacant for the most part. You have like a skeleton crew to maintain it. But each one of these data centers requires like a gigawatt of power. I mean, it's just an enormous amount of power. And to put that in perspective, one nuclear power plant could produce like 1 gigawatt. you know, and and they say we need like 50 gigawatts of additional electrical power in order to power AI. And you're like, okay, well, we'll just build more nuclear power plants. Well, yes, nuclear power has tremendous potential. Um, I wish it was more widely accepted 50 years ago, but there was a lot of politics and environmental resistance towards nuclear power. And then you had minor accidents that caused the public to panic, with like 3 Mile Island. They thought that we're going to have a complete meltdown, and like a hole is going to be burrowed into the earth all the way into the core. That never happened. But there have been other power plants throughout the world that have had problems. I think Fukushima in Japan. There was one over in Chernobyl in Ukraine. So there are accidents that happen. Typically, the accidents are different types of reactors, and it's kind of like a design flaw or maybe a location flaw. You don't want to build a nuclear power plant on top of a fault line for earthquakes, for example. That would be bad. So there's some there's some concerns there environmentally that have always delayed nuclear power. And then what do you do with the waste? Because these things have decay half-lives that last 10,000 years or more. It's nuclear waste can't easily be recycled. Once you produce it, it has to be stored somewhere remotely. And then the environmentalists will say, well, there is an environmental impact, even if it's in the deserts of Nevada, for example, or New Mexico. There's always some insect, some small mammal or rodent or something, that's going to be impacted by the storage of nuclear waste. And then you don't want to dump it in the ocean either, because that too, the ocean is full of sea life. You don't want to create Godzilla, so this has always been the drawbacks of nuclear power. It had tremendous potential, but the public has always been afraid of it. No one wants to live next to a nuclear power plant. Some of their concerns are justified, and then other concerns can perhaps be overcome with advances in technology. So new design, better design, safer design, new ways of recycling, things like this, that can form public opinion to say, okay, well, we weren't too excited about it 50 years ago, but now it's starting to look like it's more of a viable option. But the thing about it is that it takes about 10 to 15 years to build a new power plant. And if AI depends on all this power, it could cause a delay in implementing AI. Let's say for example, Grok 4 was just released. Elon Musk, says Grok 4 is amazing. Supposedly you could ask Grok 4 any question on any subject and you'd get a better than professor level response on all things, on every subject, known to man, and it's like this is amazing. And they said they're holding AI back because they're trying to feed it, tools very slowly. They're like, there's many more tools that we can make available to Grok 4, but they want to try to implement it slowly so that it doesn't run away from itself, doesn't become this three-headed monster that you can't control. So uh, there's enormous potential there, and the potential for medical breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs in design and material science and physics, all this amazing stuff. But it all requires enormous amount of power to supply these data centers. And it's like, well, Grok 4 could be, Grok 10 in 5 years. That's nice, but it'd still be on the shelf because we can't we can't build power plants fast enough to implement it. There's going to be a bottleneck in the infrastructure. It's like the technology is here, but it came so quickly that we can't implement it because we don't generate enough electricity to power it. That's why there's such a boom right now in data centers. A lot of my Navy veterans, my younger veterans, that come through the Navy training are going to be very happy about job opportunities with data centers. It's a big growing field. They're building data centers as fast as they possibly can. The other types of power plants they're also building, they're going to be building more gas, natural gas. They're going to ramp up coal. Some of these fossil fuel plants can be built quicker than nuclear power plants. It's quicker to build a coal-fired power station and a natural gas station than it is to build a nuclear power. Although nuclear would be the cleanest, it would be the most powerful, most reliable. There wouldn't be any rolling brownouts or blackouts or anything like that. Uh, there wouldn't be any interruption in the power supply, for example. Uh, Although coal is abundant and natural gas is abundant, and typically coal and natural gas is much cheaper than nuclear. So even though nuclear may be better, it comes at a higher cost per watt. And when you're talking about a a gigawatt, uh, you know, that's a lot of money. And these data centers prefer to run on wind and solar, which is kind of unrealistic. They're like, yeah, we want artificial intelligence because these are all these left-leaning, techies, and they're like, yeah, we want artificial intelligence, and we want universal basic income, and we want it to run on wind and solar. Well, that's probably not going to happen. It's like you're not going to get universal basic income, and you're not going to run these things on wind and solar. You're going to run it on coal. You're going to run it on natural gas, and then eventually, when we get all these plants built, it'll be run on nuclear power. But we think the future of AI is just around the corner, but there could be delays. There could be delays, and the delays is due to the infrastructure. It wouldn't be because of the software or the AI system itself. That could be advancing rapidly, and it could be implemented on a small scale based on the availability of electrical power. So maybe only the most powerful, largest companies in the world are using it at first. That would be Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. These companies are all building their own data centers, and they're going to also build their own power plants to power those data centers. So you'll see a coal plant next to a data center. It's like, wow, that's different. Or you'll see a gas power plant next to a data center. Uh, Data centers require a huge amount of cooling, air conditioning. A lot of these data centers are water cooled, or they could be air cooled. And if you put a data center in Texas and it's 100 degrees outside, that's going to consume an enormous amount of power, enormous amount of power. So even though, a lot of people project that, everything is going to be AI in 5 years, that may be rushing things a little bit. Not because AI isn't developed. It could be sitting on a shelf, but unavailable to the public because we don't have the power plants. China is building power plants left and right. They're building coal-fired power plants, and it's a race, towards AI between the U.S. and China. Who can build the data centers fast enough? Who can build the power plants fast enough? And whoever gets there first is going to win. So, and the thing about these data centers is that they're for the most part fully automated. They only have a small number of people that work there. They have a huge footprint. They take up a lot of space, and there's a lot of activity that is around building the data centers, the construction, and the suppliers. The people that supply all the equipment. You just imagine rows of servers. Just a warehouse full of servers, and they're all connected electrically, and they all have air conditioning. And it could be air cooled air conditioning, or it could be water cooled air conditioning. And then you'll have these giant heat exchangers. That the servers are producing so much heat that they have to have their own heat exchangers to get the heat out of the building, and bring cool air in. So even though even though the computer scientists develop AI, it could take 20 years to implement it. It's something where I think people are really excited about. It's like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. I felt that way when I was growing up, when there was the space shuttle, and it seemed like nothing was impossible. The space shuttle, was launching regularly, and we had Skylab. This is an old space station that doesn't exist anymore, and it was just amazing. And then nuclear power was an up and coming technology that seemed like that was the future. That we would have like nuclear powered spaceships, and it never happened. The space shuttle blew up. 3 Mile Island had a minor accident, partial meltdown. The space program came to a slow halt. No new power plants were being built in the U.S. for nuclear power, and the public really turned against these future technologies. And it really wasn't until the government decided to use private industry to bring back the space industry. Elon, he he may not be the smartest person in the world. He could be a very good business person. He could be very opportunistic. Was it fortune or opportunity that he developed SpaceX? Because at that particular time, the government was reaching out to private industry, and he took a chance, and it paid off. You know, a lot of times CEOs are good business people, but they don't necessarily understand the science. And what they do is they hire people that do understand the science. So you don't have to be a genius to be a CEO. You just have to hire a lot of smart people. Is Elon a genius? Well, he might be. I mean, most people think he's a genius. Other people think he's an opportunistic person that had a lot of government subsidies. When the government gives you billions and billions of dollars, you can be quite the genius on how to spend that money. You know, uh, Whether you succeed or not, sometimes the government just throws money at things. And it's like, okay, well, you want to do self-driving cars, here's $1 billion, go develop it. And then you hire a bunch of smart people to help you make that self-driving cars. So you wouldn't necessarily have to be a genius. He might be. Sometimes these things are overinflated. The idea that Elon is a genius, that might be a bit overinflated. He may be hardworking, he may be opportunistic, he may be a smart business person, he may be visionary, all these things. But I guarantee you, the government gave him billions and billions of dollars, and he was able to hire the smartest people in the industry. Does that make him a genius, or just the right person, the right place at the right time? I don't know. They'll probably be writing books about Elon for the next 100, 200 years, and history will decide. But now we see things turning around with the space program. Now it's exciting again. 50 years later, after Challenger initially blew up in the mid 80s, now people are excited about space again. And there's more private investment in nuclear power. There's new designs. With the advancement in computers and technology and engineering and using computer assisted design and engineering, you can create simulations and models and all this stuff before you even break ground. You already got the entire facility built through computer simulation before the shovel even digs up the first bit of dirt. So and then there's like these micro reactors, small modular reactors. They say the technology is available now. You can put a small modular reactor that can power an entire city. Like say you had a mid-sized city of 100,000 population, you might have a small modular reactor that provides power for that whole city. You wouldn't have to have this massive nuclear power plant. Like I think they built a new one in Georgia. Southern Power built a new one in Georgia. Vogtle 1 and Vogtle 2. Massive, nuclear power facility. But you could build it on large scale, or you could build it on small scale. And now they got different types of spacecraft, satellites that use nuclear material to power those spacecraft. So here it is, 50 years later, that again nuclear power is making a comeback. The stocks are going up, the investment's going up, various designs, public opinion has changed, and the technology seems to have come a long, long way. 50 years ago, public opinion was very much against it. 50 years ago, space shuttle blew up, and it seemed like that was the end of the space program. And 3 Mile Island happened, and that seemed like the end of nuclear power. Now here it is. We think AI is the future, and people are very excited about it. And it can happen quickly, or it could be delayed. by infrastructure. You know, we we were so afraid of nuclear power over the years, we didn't build the power plants. And now that we have this new AI technology available, and it's like we're just waiting on the power plants to be built. Then we can implement it. And you can't build these power plants fast enough. Well, it takes 15 years to build a nuclear power plant. So even though, AI is here, AI is going to be more and more common, there's going to be a bottleneck because of infrastructure. Uh, I was looking at self-driving trucks, and it doesn't necessarily rely on AI. It can be somewhat contained within the truck. If you think about trucks before 2010, we call those trucks pre-emission trucks because that was before AGR and the after treatment systems. Then came new EPA requirements, and you got all this additional pollution control features on the truck. So we had pre-emission trucks, and then we have post-emission trucks. I think that's going to be true with self-driving trucks. I think you're going to have like pre AI trucks and then after AI trucks. You're going to, I would almost classify it as you're going to have primitive trucks, and then you're going to have smart trucks. Like you have smartphones. You had the old cell phone, which was good for making phone calls, but by comparison, a smartphone had apps. Yeah, so no one uses the old cell phones anymore. Everyone uses a smartphone. That could be the way with trucks. Trucks without a computer, without self-driving, maybe like primitive. That's a primitive truck, and a truck that's self-driving is kind of like a smart truck. But the smart truck doesn't necessarily have to be connected to AI. It could be self-contained. The software could be self-contained. Now, it does need connectivity to update maps, weather, road conditions, new software updates, and stuff like that. And when you think about trucks going through rural areas like the Rocky Mountains, well, connectivity could be an issue. And I think this is where something like Starlink comes into play. Again, another Elon Musk company. Starlink comes into play where maybe the trucks can connect to Starlink. But is there a bottleneck for self-driving trucks because we're waiting on infrastructure and technology? I would think a lot of these technologies would combine. I don't see self-driving trucks not using AI. I think they would work together with AI. But if AI is being delayed by 10 to 15 years because of power plants, then perhaps self-driving trucks will also be delayed 10 to 15 years. It's like, yeah, we can have self-driving trucks, but we're not quite ready with the infrastructure. It's like we have prototypes, and just like self-driving cars, they can be in Phoenix, and they can be in San Francisco, and they can be in Austin, but they're not ready for prime time nationwide. It could be the same thing with self-driving trucks. It could work in prototypes in certain areas, but they're waiting on the technology to the infrastructure to be fully developed before they can make self-driving trucks available nationwide. So even though self-driving truck technology is available in a prototype today, it still may take 10 to 15 years to implement. Just like AI. AI could be available today, but we're waiting on the power plants, and we can't make it an everyday use until those power plants are built. I think you'll find technology rolled out that can be included in your cell phone, on a small scale. You can have AI on your cell phone, your smartphone. You could have AI through your laptops and your computers, um, because that infrastructure is already in place. It wouldn't be too much of a leap to say, okay, we can make AI available through these devices because they're already connected through 5G networks and stuff like that, and we can use it for some things. We can use, but we can't use it for the big things because the big things require more power, and we don't have the capacity to generate that much power. So I think, career-wise, people that are interested in electrical power generation, nuclear, coal, natural gas, those might be good careers to get into. Um, and anything to do with electrical, construction. I mean, they're going to be building data centers for decades to come. Construction jobs would probably be pretty good. So there could be opportunities there. Now, could any of this stuff be sped up? Could it be? I mean, they're cutting the red tape like crazy. To try to build these power plants as fast as they can. And you could say, well, on the long estimate would be 15, 25 years. Or it could be a shorter estimate of, say, 10 years. Could you get less than 10 years? I don't know. I don't, that's asking a lot to build 50 more nuclear power plants in the next 10 years. That's asking a lot. I mean, even if you did, there could be pushback politically. Different administrations, different policies, different, uh, environmental administrators. It could go like crazy, during one administration. Then next administration, politics comes involved, and then they just put the brakes on everything. That would just cause a longer delay. It's like, well, we could have built these power plants in 15 years, but now it's going to take more like 50 years. Meanwhile, the technology is available. We're just waiting on power. We just don't have the power. We don't have the electrical power to make it happen. And if we are experiencing delays, I guarantee you, China is not. China is not going to have any delays. And if we don't get the politics right, um, China's going to come out on top. One thing about being a communist dictatorship, you can make the earth move, and one of the drawbacks of being a republic is we got to vote on all this stuff before we start moving, and then we're always subject to changing our minds. Different elections, different outcomes, different politicians, and it's like different policies. Meanwhile, the dictators just keep moving along, and you're looking at that, and you're like, damn, China just built 100 of these facilities, and we can't build one. Our own system is working against us. So, I'll wrap this up and say AI technology is coming very, very fast, but it may be implemented very, very slowly if we don't have the power infrastructure to make it happen. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.